So this is the Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff podcast. I'm your host, Sean Kneese, and on this show we dive into off-the-cuff and candid conversations about the bigger topics in the world. And when I started this show, one of the reasons I started the show, like going from my old show BSing, where I mainly interviewed artists, was I wanted to be more vulnerable with this show and like put more of myself in it, as well as interview people about important topics. But I've done more solo episodes with this, and that's the topic I wanted to talk about today: is vulnerability. And a lot of people see it as a weakness or being weak, but vulnerability means it's more about being authentic, and you put um, your truth out there, and then you're open to the feedback, and it's being honest with yourself. And I have my friend Ryan here today joining me. And I know we've had conversations about this before. We both do improv together, and improv is a kind of a way of putting yourself out there and being vulnerable and spontaneous, and it kind of helps with that a bit more, getting out of your comfort zone. So I guess we'll just start with like what vulnerability really means and what the misconception of vulnerability is. I mean, I said a little bit about that. What are your thoughts?
Well, first off, thanks for having me, Sean. I mean,
Oh yeah,
it's a blast seeing you again and getting to talk to you. And I know that I was on the BSN show. We've gone from bullshitting to talking about the deep stuff.
yeah. Now it's getting more serious. It's less talk. Talk is more
Yeah,
serious
we're
than
evolving.
BSing. Yeah,
We're growing up. The podcast went through puberty,
yeah.
but it's
And
great
then
to talk. It's great to be here. Thanks for having me. We're getting right into it too. I mean, there's nothing that speaks to vulnerability quite like just taking that big swing, right? I mean,
yeah,
my definition of vulnerability is very much putting yourself, first of all, taking yourself out of your own comfort zone, but to achieve a greater understanding of what you're capable of. And when you opt to be vulnerable, I feel that it is really an act of courage more than anything. Um, Vulnerability is not, I don't think, I think the primal survival instinct of a human being is to not be vulnerable. You know, we intuitively fight against that because we don't like that feeling.
to kind of like self-preservation, or is that, or what is it?
Is it self-preservation? You know, I, um, I think we're more apt to want to crawl to our safe spaces. I don't mean that in a socially cultural way. I just mean in a quite literal, like,
Yeah,
psychological and in some cases physical way. We seek to avoid the dangers that present us with challenges. But I also think when we are faced with those challenges and we're ready to subject ourselves to them, it's that sense of vulnerability that propels us to want to solve that problem. You know, I think so many of us face large challenges and we're confronted by our fears, whether it's professional or personal, that when those fears are right in front of us, I think more often than not, take the road to comfort. We
yeah. And then the
settle
road to
into our
comfort is like
habits.
then the what if, then you get into all these what ifs. Like, what if I did take that risk? And if the road of taking action and taking risks, like you might fail, but like now I think like the times I've taken a risk and like I've went for something I wanted, even if it didn't work out or whatever, then at least I'm not like, oh, what if I had done that? Then it's like, oh, it like I don't dwell on that too much. It's like I took my chance, and what
Sure.
happened happened.
Yeah. And then you can toss around, what could I have done differently? And I think that's the difference on whether or not you choose to keep pursuing whatever it is that you subjected yourself to. Um, but yeah, I think at its bare bones, at its most basic level, vulnerability is not something we willingly choose. It's something we force ourselves into so that we could become better. And that's the choice.
Yeah.
If you want to be better at whatever it is that you're doing or whoever you are, you have to peel away whatever you have to tear down whatever those walls you spent years building up and start building new ones, or at the very least start branching out into different areas of your psyche and in your life.
Yeah, maybe it's like maybe people are afraid to do that because they're afraid of like losing their concept of themselves. It's like
Totally.
because like once you're getting feedback from other people, it's kind of scary. It's like because you have this idea of your in your head of like how you are and everything, and then
Yeah.
yeah,
We all too often, we settle into who we are, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that as long as you're happy with who you are and you're not being a jerk to other people. Uh, but yeah, I mean, it's yeah, I totally agree with what you just said.
yeah, and that connect vulnerability is the only way you can really connect. Like sometimes we're afraid to like really be ourselves, and because like what people, but then it's like people can't really relate or connect with you unless you put out like who you really are, what you're really thinking, and yeah,
Yeah, I think judgment and rejection certainly are those, fireballs that are launched at us when we are trying to do something different with ourselves, or when we're trying to, rise to the occasion and evolve as people or as artists, which is mostly how I leverage vulnerability in my favor. But, judgment, rejection, failure, all these things that are very real and are going to happen are reasons why we prevent ourselves from becoming better or from staring down that vulnerability.
yeah. And if you never get feedback on like what you're doing wrong, how are you going to improve it? Because you might not even know what you're doing wrong or what mistake you're making, or
Yeah, you have you
somebody
have
pointed
to
it out.
eat shit before you eat steak.
Yeah,
That's a terrible analogy.
yeah,
Here's a better one. You have to dig through the shit before dig through the mud before you find the gold, right?
yeah. And then you appreciate the gold more. The
Completely. And like it's hard. It's not I think effort is also one of those things that scares people from marching forward and putting themselves to the test, because you have to put in the work and you have to make mistakes and you are probably going to humiliate yourselves on some level. But if you've got the will to subject yourself to that, then you know that you'll come out of it okay, because I feel like in the long run no one's really holding any of your mistakes against you, unless they're obviously like, unless you're
yeah,
causing serious harm. Don't abuse people.
yeah,
Uh, but everybody is very much consumed with who they are, that they're not taking notes on what you're doing. And I think that's another thing that people seem to overlook, when they are faced with this sort of, vulnerability in becoming something better than what they were.
yeah.
We
Do you
sit
think
here
there's
and
like a balance between like vulnerability not being like self-deprecating? Because I feel like even like self-deprecating humor can be kind of like it's not coming from a positive place necessarily. It's just kind of I feel like there's a balance. Like these are like oh yeah, like kind of you can joke about yourself, but not in a way where you're putting yourself down. Like oh I do this awkward thing sometimes, but not like oh I'm a mess, I'm so terrible, like and just kind of constantly beat on yourself.
yeah, self-deprecating humor. I mean, I used to do that a lot, both on stage and in casual conversation. And I think I know why I did it. It was because I, was facing down insecurities. My strategy with that was I'm going to joke about myself before someone else can do it. But again, the reality is nobody's probably thinking about those things
Yeah,
unless you put it out there. I guess if people are okay with themselves after self-deprecating themselves, or what, then sure, go for it. It's not for any of us to say where someone's mind is at when they're doing self-deprecating humor, but it's surely something that, whatever you're putting out there is what people are going to take away.
yeah.
I
And
remember.
sometimes you're amplifying your flaws like that. Like people might not even notice those things you're pointing out that much.
Yeah,
Like,
yeah, yeah. You're magnifying it. You're the one putting the idea in people's heads because nobody's thinking about it except for you.
yeah,
And again, that's natural. You stare. You're with yourself all day long, so you know yourself. In and out. I
yeah,
remember, because there's there's a bit of an age gap between me and some other improvisers and performers, and I remember for a little while I was kind of mentioning how I feel like I'm the uncle at the family picnic who just kind of hangs around, and like some of these younger performers weren't seeing me that way. They were just
yeah,
looking at me as a person who was just out and about, hanging out,
yeah.
doing the
And
thing that they
I
do
used to be the
also.
same way. Like I think I'm younger than you. Well, I mean, we don't need to go into like who's older, who's young, but I'm just saying,
Yes, Sean, I would
yeah.
appreciate it. No, joking.
Yeah, but like sometimes I'm 34 and like sometimes I was like if I was in a group or something where there was like I used to focus on that much like, oh, I'm the older, but like, and then sometimes like when I didn't want to say my age, they eventually I'd say it and they'd be like, oh, just 34, that's not that old. So
Well,
yeah,
and I feel like whatever number you say, nobody is going to drop their jaw and be like, holy shit, get out of
yeah,
here.
well, unless you're like 200 years old or something,
Well, I think even then, I mean,
yeah,
I'm not going to mention names or anything, but there are people of varying ages, on this comedy scene that we subject ourselves to, from anywhere between 19 and 76. And I know two people that are those
yeah,
ages, and I talk to them in equal measure. And again, nobody people might make snap judgments. That is human nature. Like when someone first walks into a room, you're going to gather an impression of them, but nobody is applying that to somebody who allows themselves to let you get to know them, right? I'm
yeah,
walking around talking to people as if being older is something that they're noticing, but they didn't it never literally never came up until I brought it up. And that's something that I learned from, frankly. I was like, oh yeah, I mean
yeah, because
it,
really you're just as old as you feel too. Because it's like there's people who are act old in their late 20s, and there's people who are still young and doing what they do in their 50s. So
well, I think, and I'm very grateful for being a part of comedy, because I think comedy is one of those mediums, and I can't speak to all the other ones like music and whatnot, but comedy is one of those mediums where it really does it touches so many bases that demographics are seemingly ignored, and I think in a good way, right? Everybody has something to say. Everybody has a personality that they uh, fine tune and put out there as an extension of them and their creativity, that you don't have to pay attention to the minutia of your physiology, or your age or your
yeah,
ethnicity, or anything like that. Like I think when you're bringing to the table a bit of yourself, then it's appreciated by anyone around you. Again, unless you're an asshole, don't be an asshole.
yeah. Just be like authentic and confident. Yeah,
Be open.
that's why
Be
sometimes
vulnerable.
assholes are more confident because they don't care. But that's not good to be.
Well, I mean, an asshole is they're
Yeah,
arrogant and they're not
that's like the other
self-aware.
extreme. Yeah.
Yeah, I think they're insecure usually.
Oh, so it's like you
Well,
think it's like feigning confidence, like not like real confidence. Like
yeah, I think if you're being a jerk to people, it's because you're fooling yourself.
yeah,
You're
yeah.
not.
I guess because someone truly wouldn't feel need to put anybody else down. But
Well, I think yeah, if you're comfortable with who you are, then you don't need to give anybody else a hard time. I mean, obviously, if you're really good friends with people, you could break each other's balls. But
yeah,
I think if your default setting is to do that with somebody who you don't really know, then I think the
yeah,
problem might lie within you,
yeah.
and
But
that therefore you're kind of an a-hole.
yeah, and
But if you,
oh, go
sorry,
on. What were you saying?
I was going to say, but the theme of this episode is being vulnerable and kind of putting yourself in a position that you're not typically used to. I think if you do that on a social and a conversational level, I feel like it's more widely appreciated. Even I'm a very awkward person, and I, constantly tell people that I have borderline, like crippling social anxiety. And when I tell some people that, they act shocked. They're like, I can't even tell because you're out, you're about, you're starting conversations, and I think it's that sort of, first of all, it's coping mechanisms firing off when I'm in social settings, but I think it's also this desire to, not even a desire, but an understanding of knowing, like, yeah, I'm only going to meet people if I put myself out there and make myself a little,
Yeah.
a little vulnerable and a little, exposed as a person. And I am awkward, and I say awkward things, and I make jokes that aren't funny sometimes, and sometimes I feel like I don't know how to talk to people, and I struggle a lot of times. But when I wake up the next morning and I reflect on the previous day's socializing or
Yeah.
events, I know that I didn't do anything that was so bad, and I feel better because I know that I ultimately put myself in a position to be able to meet new people or get to know people a little better. And when I see them again, it's not going to be this feeling of exclusion or this feeling of being inside of my head.
Well, and some of it, I guess, is being happy and complete with yourself, and like if you enjoy, like me, like I'm learning to kind of like enjoy my own company too, just like working on my creative projects, whether it's music or the podcast or anything else or writing. I mean, I have multiple like creative outlets and enjoying that and being happy with that. Like I feel like that makes me more confident. Like if I do meet other people, because then it's like, oh, I can enjoy my own company, so like I know who I am, and then it also gives you more to talk about if like you have your own thing too. So well, it's good to talk about them too, but like it's a balance, give and take.
Yeah, well, no, I mean, people want to know who you are. So if you have things that you love doing, and you know, we're all works in progress. That's a lifelong
Yeah,
uh, assignment, in my opinion. I mean, we're never complete. We're constantly just trying to get better and better. And you reach a certain point where you have such a fuller understanding of who you are, and it's based on the things that you love to do, and you know, your value system comes more into focus, and that has to do with our guy Mark Manson that we talked about
yeah.
prior to this
He's the
podcast.
one that like that's where I first heard that more positive concept of vulnerability. Because before that, vulnerable was like to me was just like, oh, you're being insecure, and then it invites somebody to kind of make fun of you or whatever. But that's not necessarily what vulnerability is.
Yeah, but well, vulnerability in the past was always seen as weakness. That's why some of our boomer parents don't know how to embrace that. But
Yeah.
that's
Well,
I'm
especially
not.
with men, like that was a thing. Like that was like men aren't.
Yeah, or even feel them.
Yeah.
Um, You're supposed to ignore them, but yeah, that's certainly where it comes from. Uh, but yeah, just to smooth out that point, yeah, you get older and you have a greater understanding of yourself, and you establish your boundaries, and you don't allow people to cross them, because when they do, then you don't want to associate with those people anymore. But when there are people who accept your boundaries and kind of see you for who you are and what you're putting out there, because you've achieved this level of comfort with who you are, then I think the results are a lot greater. Yeah.
Yeah. And well, and you kind of helped me in the beginning with the oh first like by saying oh it's great to be here, Sean, because I kind of I'm still kind of working on the intros, like how I like introduce the person and then also say like what the topic is like, so like I guess like in the future more like oh hey Ryan, how's it going, man, this is the show, like this is what we're doing, like add like a personal, but also like do the intro too, like
I could be your announcer. You could have me on for like 5 seconds, and I could kind of do one of those things like, you're listening to Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff with Sean Kneese. And now, ladies and gentlemen, your host, Sean Kneese.
and I go thank you, Ryan. Well, today we're gonna
Let's Talk About the D Stuff is brought to you by Stamps.com.
Yeah.
I'm auditioning for you now. So yeah, I just made myself vulnerable.
Nice.
Not easy. Um, yeah.
But yeah, the main thing I'm working on now is like just like body language, learning how to convey like more what I'm thinking and feeling, like what my body. I just trying to have more like open body language, because it's not like sometimes like in my head I'm like an open person and I'm like in a friend. It's just like sometimes my what I'm thinking and feeling doesn't always match my body language. So that's like something I'm working on, and that's something I'm trying to be open to feedback on, even if like because I used to get hurt if I got any kind of like uh comment on like how I came across or acted or anything. But now it's like, okay, but if I don't get any comment on that, I won't improve and all that. So,
Well, if you're not having a good day, then you shouldn't fight against your body language should not fight against that. You could still be polite if you're having a bad day. Um, but I get what you're saying, and I think I don't think you should fight anything against yourself if you're in a social setting or if you're in a professional setting where you're just kind of not really comfortable with yourself, then that's fine. I mean, I think we also need to learn to just sort of forgive ourselves because we're not gonna be feeling it all the time.
yeah. Well,
I
and then
mean,
you got to realize that other people are kind of going through the same thing. I think that also is another thing that helps, is you realize that everybody else is kind of going through the same thing to a degree. Like they're more focused on themselves and how they're perceived.
yeah, I consider myself someone who could read read the room or read people fairly well. Um, Not like in a detective sense, just like in an observatory way. And if I'm sensing that someone is uncomfortable or if someone's kind of just itching to get out of the conversation or maybe they don't want to be in this room anymore, then I'll heed to that and I'll just kind of not necessarily back away, but
Yeah.
I'll adjust accordingly. I'll
Maybe
understand.
sometimes people like maybe sometimes at first like you think maybe I'm speaking more when I say like you, I'm saying like me, like my thought, like maybe at first like if you don't know someone and they're you get the vibe like, oh, they're thinking this person is weird or whatever. Maybe it's just like, oh, that person just doesn't know me yet,
Hmm.
like so it's like they just don't know what I'm about like yet. It's like, but if they knew, like it's just like maybe that's all it
Yeah.
is. It's not like a reflection of me,
Well, I think it took me forever to realize that people aren't going to trust you right away.
Yeah,
And it's not that they distrust you. It's not as if they are looking at you as if you're some sort of suspicious, conniving individual. I just think that it takes a few encounters with somebody before they realize, okay, this is a good person or this is a decent
yeah,
person. They're not going to spill all their deepest, darkest secrets, but they're going to not mind your company.
yeah.
Whereas I think initially, it takes a little while to get that. I think initially it's not that people have their guard up so much as maybe they're kind of feeling it out a little
Yeah.
bit. And
Yeah,
some people
and
just
that's
aren't
why I think,
comfortable with that.
and I think that's why for me, like with the improv, like it worked more doing like the teams or like when I did like the classes or the drop-ins than just going to the jams by themselves. Because I think it's like when you're working with a group of people on something like or a team, then it's more there's more like an interactive thing to it. It's yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, surely. I mean, I've taken classes and it's not until around maybe week 3 or 4 where I actually feel okay with some of the people in the room. Or sometimes it's not until week 3 or 4 where I'm just like, I'm not clicking with anybody here. So I kind of just want this class to end now. Um, but I mean, that's just sort of how it goes. I think,
yeah.
you
And
know,
you got to accept that you won't click with everyone too, and it's not a reflection.
exactly.
Yeah,
Exactly. I'm trying to get better at that. Actually, it's something I'm working on. There are some people who are just not going to like you, and it's not that they hate you or dislike you or wish you ill will. It's just that your sensibilities and your values are not lined up, and
yeah,
people are never going to articulate that because you can't. It's a tough thing to articulate. I'll never say to somebody, "Look, you seem like a good person, but our sensibilities are just not lined up, so I'm not going to talk to you anymore." I would never say that to
yeah.
somebody,
But
but I
it's
would
better
act
they
on it.
know, because then it's like at the same time, while they might not like you for your values and everything, there'll be somebody else who does.
Yeah,
So it's
exactly.
like, yeah,
You just find the people that you gel with, but that comes with accepting that there are people you're not going to gel with. And
yeah,
again, it's an area of my life that I seek to get better at because I genuinely like people and I like getting to know them, and I look for ways to understand somebody, and I'm always more curious about someone else's life than my own because I live my own life. I don't need
yeah,
to
Yeah.
debrief on that.
Yeah. Well, that's kind of
Well,
why I got into like interviewing people, like just kind of getting their story. Like BSing. Like I interviewed hundreds of people, and I've interviewed some people on this show. Just like
yes,
especially like people from all different backgrounds and parts. It's just so interesting to, and then through that, like you seeing the different experience, you also see like the common humanity too, like the things that kind of unite us, like no matter where we grew up or whatever. So
yeah, oh, absolutely. And even if we're not united by that, at least there's something to glean about that person.
yeah,
I think living in this particular metropolitan area kind of helps with that too, because there's
yeah,
so many different walks of life that could feed that curiosity about people.
yeah, true.
But with that comes with the notion of there are certain people who, for one reason or another, are not going to invite you to their party, or they're not going to make plans with you, or they're going to try to dodge you when you
Yeah,
try to make plans with them.
you just gotta
And
accept that's okay, So
that's okay. Yeah, I think I learned my lesson. I think after I typically give people maybe two tries. Like if I sense after the second time that I'm trying to make plans or that I'm trying to talk to them that they're just kind of inching away from me or just kind of not into it, then I'm like, all right, I get it. This person, we're not on the same frequency. That's cool. That doesn't mean that we have to launch
yeah,
rockets at each other.
that's what I'm trying to work on too. Is like it's not a reflection on me and stuff like
Right.
I'm starting to do that more with like dating, like like you go on a date, like if you're not if it's just not the right fit, it's just not the right fit. It's not necessarily like a reflection of you, stuff like
Yeah, it's funny. The word dating, I feel now can be applied to really every area of life. You go on job interviews, you go on acting auditions, you go to classes with new people, you go to parties or social settings. Essentially, what you're doing is you're dating the world,
yeah,
and you're either going to hit it off and continue things, or you're going to realize very quickly that it's not worth plowing through this. So let's end it. I think that's very,
yeah.
apropos.
When a job interview, I think not only their experience they're looking at, but they're also like, is this someone we want around? Is this someone we're going to get along with? Like,
Yes, everything's about chemistry. Everything's about, and in some cases it is, there's going to be shallow reasons applied, and you just have to accept that too. I mean,
yeah,
sometimes you just are not gonna, you know, you're just not gonna coincide with someone else's vision, beliefs, values, whatever. And
yeah.
and it's
Like
okay.
auditioning for a role too, they might have something in mind ahead of time. Doesn't mean you did a bad
Oh,
job and they did. Yeah,
yeah, I mean I mean the most advice I've ever gotten, as since I started acting, was, or advice that's been reinforced many times over, is you don't take it personally, and sometimes they just don't want you. That's it. And you audition, and then you forget about the audition. You just go on about your day. And easier said than done, but I'm getting much better at it. Recently, I auditioned for something, and I really, really, really wanted it. So I took as many steps as I could to prepare for it. I reached out to people for like some mild coaching. I did everything I possibly could to show up to that audition and nail it. And lo and behold, it was probably one of the best auditions I've ever had in my life, and I didn't get it.
hmm.
And I was reeling from this. I mean, I was in pain, like a lot of emotional distress. I like to journal as much as I can, and I hope no one ever reads those journal pages, because
Wow.
they will seriously be alarmed by how much angst and disgust I put into those pages. But now that I'm sort of through that fog, I realize, hey man, there's an audition. You didn't get it. You're not who they were looking for. And the people that they chose may not have had a better audition than me, but that's who they want. That's who's filling the blanks in their mind for who they think would look good for this thing. So
Yeah,
that's it. And end of conversation. You could either conduct yourself professionally and with a little bit of class, or you could be an entitled crybaby and blame everything under the sun, and shoot yourself in the foot, and have it impact your day to day. And I choose not to do that. I choose the former. I'm going to let it roll. I'm hopefully going to get a chance to audition again for this thing. And if I do, I will take the same steps, but this time expect no outcome.
And that's kind of what Bryan Cranston said his approach to acting was, and he said he started getting more roles after that too. He just like he didn't think about the outcome. He just thought like I'm here to present my version of the role, and they'll either like it or they won't. And like once he had that approach, he started getting more roles. He said.
Yeah, yeah, it's a very not blasé, but it's an indication that you're rising above expectations and outcomes, which I think is really important, especially as a creative and an artist. You know, you should only be doing these things for yourself. You shouldn't be doing it for other people. And maybe a lot of people would disagree with me on that. Like, no, no, you have to serve the audience. But I think your audience will find you, and I think casting directors will find you, and I think your social groups will find you, and the people in the world that you're meant to be surrounded by will eventually come to you, so long as you don't compromise, who you are and pander, because people see right through that shit.
Yeah, it's weird how like, and sometimes you don't know like how it's gonna draw. Like my first newsletter and my first episode of the show, I was kind of just getting some stuff out I needed to get out in order to kind of move on and go through this, get to the new phase I was doing with the show and everything. But I got so many messages about like, oh, that newsletter really resonated with me. I was really interested in what would happen next, and oh, that first episode, like I've never heard someone be that vulnerable on a podcast. Like a lot of people, I didn't even expect it to resonate with anyone. Or like recently, I did that. I just did put out this like demo of like some synth music I made, and I was just like, okay, this is just some music I made over the years. I'll put it out there, and like then a couple people bought it, and a couple people, and then like even this DIY label reached out to me. And it's like, oh, hey, I really like your stuff. Like, do release for me, and I wasn't even expecting any of that, and then
Yeah,
yeah,
that's the whole idea. Because I mean, just like our guy Mark Manson, I mean, it's a book that a lot of people have read, and it kind of has a place now in pop culture. But
the
that's
subtle
that
art of not
subtle
giving
art
a
of not
fuck.
giving a fuck. Yeah, there's a lot to it. It's when you stop giving a fuck about audiences and start giving a fuck, and you place the amount of fucks you have to give into your product and like your appreciation for something, then it doesn't matter what else happens, because
Yeah,
you've invested the right amount of fucks to give in something that you give a fuck about.
like even like right now we're doing with the podcast. We're just trying to have like a well thought out conversation and
Yeah.
thought, yeah, whatever happens.
Yes.
Yeah. But I said, would you say? I guess
That's
there's
great
a.
to hear, though, man. That's cool about your music.
Oh, thanks. Yeah, yeah, and I'm working on another release now. I'm doing vocals on one track, and then I have someone else singing on another, and yeah, it's
Is
a
it
couple
is this
different
on, is
styles I'm
this
doing.
is this on Spotify?
It's on Bandcamp, but I might figure out how to get it on Spotify. I think there's like a process for getting it on Spotify.
Yeah, get it on Spotify. What's the do you have like a DJ name or something?
Yeah, it's Insomniac AD.
Okay, that's cool.
Yeah, yeah.
I like
It's a
that.
long time ago. I did a project called Insomniac, and then this is Insomniac AD, which is.
Yeah, that's awesome. Who
But
knows?
but
You never
I'd
know.
say. Oh, what were you saying? Sorry.
I was going to say, you never know. I mean, you get it up on Spotify, it might get picked up by a producer somewhere, and next thing you
Yeah.
know, you're scoring a TV show.
Yeah, exactly. That's why it's just like for me, it's just like I'm just doing all the things I enjoy, and like I'm just being consistent with them, like the podcast, the writing, and then doing the music. And like you never know what'll take off, or maybe more than one thing will take off. It's like, so that's kind of where I'm at right now um,
Yeah,
with that.
that's it.
But
Just
but I
keep doing stuff.
yeah, and I'd say I guess you would agree that there's a relationship between like vulnerability and resilience, and like um, so,
Yeah, 100%. I think so. Another great sort of well-known and popular kind of speaker on vulnerability is someone named Brene Brown. Um, she has a few books out. I heard her first on a podcast, and her whole thing with vulnerability is that it truly is a measure of being brave. Because if I think the biggest misconception about being vulnerable is that you're scared and that you're afraid to march forth into the night. But what she kind of alludes to is that it's quite the opposite. You're actually extremely brave and courageous, and you only stand to get stronger from
Yeah.
subjecting yourself to conditions that you would otherwise shy away from, which again is, when you think about it, that's really what vulnerability is. If you want to go, if you want to go and try something new on stage or explore a completely different arena than what you're used to. I mean, I know I'm going through that right now with, um, I'm really getting into like characters. There's this sort of niche sort of corner of the comedy scene of people that just like do characters. It's not stand up. It's almost similar though. Individual performers step out on stage
Yeah.
and they're not being themselves. They have written a full character for themselves and they perform it. That's something very new to me, and it's very vulnerable to me because you have to act and you have to write and you have to, it's just a different sort of process of creating that I'm used to. But I think because I keep returning to it and I keep going forward and I keep building up this wherewithal to endure that process. And now I'm starting to go to character open mics and do them in front of people. And
Hmm.
yeah, it's nerve wracking as fuck. And it's going sort of well. And I'm getting good feedback from people afterwards. But at the same time, it's like I'm not exactly getting booked on every show in town. So it's that resilience that's a result of choosing to be vulnerable that is mostly going to pay dividends. Because I know you can only
Yeah.
get better the more you do something.
And also, whatever feedback you get, like it might feel like at the time, it might feel like sometimes it's hard to take criticism at first, but I feel like even at the times where I felt like the criticism was harsh, like it kind of stuck with me on some way and it helped me improve like later. And then you kind of
Yeah.
take that with you. So, but you never get that feedback if you don't put yourself out there. So,
Yeah. Well, I typically take criticism with a grain of salt. I mean, unless it's aligned with what I'm trying to accomplish,
yeah.
I typically will ignore it. But I'm probably speaking more about unsolicited criticism. When I ask people for feedback or people I trust, or
Hmm.
really anyone, when I ask people for any sort of like, what would you think of that? Or what do you think I should do here? Like, then I'm more apt to listen and then parse it. And,
Yeah.
you
Oh,
know,
but if people give it unsolicited, it kind of,
yeah,
it's
I'm just like, all right, yeah, I can think about it.
not. Yeah, but it can also be healing too. I guess cathartic for like, especially like if someone puts maybe like personal things in like an art or like because you said like how it's also it's like brave to put. I think there's also like a healing part to like vulnerability too. Like because if you keep stuff in, it
Totally.
builds up. But yeah.
Oh yeah, think about the stuff that you were nervous or afraid to do a year ago. I mean, now it's probably second language to you by now, you know?
Yeah. Well, especially with the new show and like all the like solo episodes I've done, I put myself out there more with that. And
Yeah.
it's kind of helped me like accept myself more and like not take myself too seriously too. So
Yeah, I mean, I measure progress by where I was, 6 months ago compared to where I am now. And if I'm not much of anywhere, then maybe I need to change some things up. But if I feel like I'm making some headway somewhere, then I'm like, all right, I think I'm doing okay. And that's applied to various areas of my life. It's not necessarily just, in general, because that's a hard, it's not a black or white thing. There are things that I'm much better at today than I was 6 months ago, but then there are things where I'm just like evaluating and taking inventory and wondering if I should keep doing that or should I keep investing what I invest in this area of my life if I'm not seeing any progress? And the answer is no. What's the definition of crazy? Doing something repeatedly and expecting different results.
yeah, it's interesting they say that because I looked up the definition and it's not really that. It's something
Well,
else. Yeah,
it's more of a metaphor.
yeah, it's
I
a
don't think I
yeah.
think also in 2024 we're not supposed to just haphazardly use the word crazy.
Yeah,
Um, but I think it's a very telling sort of metaphor for like, hey, if you're doing the same shit over and over and over and nothing is getting better, then guess what? Stop doing that shit over and over and over. You
yeah,
have to do something
or
different.
taking like a different approach to it. Maybe like the approach to what you're doing is wrong.
Yeah, well,
I
and
mean,
yeah, and again, that's where that vulnerability begins to creep in because no one likes to change their habits. Some people get so comfortable with how they do things and where they are that to even suggest, well, hey, if it's not working out for you, why don't you, maybe you should stop doing that, or maybe you should try something else. And, a lot of people don't like hearing that. Most people would
Yeah,
rather
you
whine,
get
complain.
defensive, and yeah,
Yeah, they want to rant. They want to
yeah,
blame the world instead of themselves. I mean, those are the people that kind of lack self-awareness.
yeah. And self awareness can hinder, and not lack of self awareness can hinder your progress too.
I think it's the number one thing that hinders your progress. If you have a lack of self-awareness, then you could pretty much attribute all of your shortcomings and not all your failures, but a lack of self-awareness, I think, is a tremendous enemy to most.
Yeah, definitely. And to wrap up, I guess what can we say about the like how
We're wrapping up
vulnerability?
already. We're just getting started. This isn't a
I,
3-hour podcast.
well,
I'm
maybe when
sorry.
I
Yeah.
get a bigger audience, I'll do 3 hours. But like now, as I'm building the audience, 3 hours. When
All
I
right.
get famous,
Okay.
famous is like Joe Rogan. I can do the 3 hour podcast. But
All right. All right. I'll give. Okay. I will follow your lead here.
okay.
Yeah. To wrap
So
up, I'm sorry I
I
cut
guess
you
we
off.
could close on like the transformative power of vulnerability, like how it can be transformational, or
You know, how does it transform you? Well, if you listen, the only way you're going to know that you could accomplish something, whether it's small or large, is by taking that first step, whether it's confidently or tepidly, but you have to submit yourself to the unknown. And that is something that will transform you. Because when you do that, when you submit yourself to that unknown future, whether it's tomorrow or 7 years from now, you will eventually know. But you have to submit yourself to that. And you
yeah,
have to accept that you're going to be fine one way or the other. You're either going to succeed or you're going to learn a lesson. And I think that's the biggest takeaway that I experience with vulnerability. Every time I get afraid to do something
you just froze.
because I will be in a vulnerable position,
Shit.
I say to myself,
Oh, you cut out for a bit, so I'll just start the last thought again.
oh, okay. And anytime I uh, submit myself to a very vulnerable position, I say to myself, one of two things are going to happen here. I'm either going to fail miserably or I'm going to get rejected and will have learned something about myself, or I'm going to experience some sort of elation of progress. And either way, I think that's a win-win. The
Yeah,
only way that you lose is if you just stand still. And that's
yeah,
why
and you don't try,
vulnerability is
and
very
you never live, because living
right.
is the failures is part of living. Like if you're not failing, you're not living. So
That's why vulnerability is very transformative. You will not be the same person you were if you just power through and do it, whatever it is, the thing that you want to do. You want to go ask that person out, go ask them out. The absolute worst possible thing that they do is they say no. If you want to go on stage and try something experimental and different,
yeah,
the worst possible thing is that people just sit in the crowd and watch you do it.
yeah. And sometimes
And
we reject ourselves before other people reject us. Like we assume,
yeah,
it's hard to phrase like what I mean. Um, like I ask someone out and be like, oh, totally cool. If you like, kind of like ask someone out, like assuming like they're not gonna want to, or ask do that. Like it's hard to put into words what I mean. Like sometimes we kind of have that
yeah.
assumption, like
I think
it isn't
applying
gonna
this
work.
to
Yeah, yeah,
yeah, applying this to like dating is a little bit rougher because I mean that requires two people and there's a whole lot of trust that needs to be built, and it's not like a task that you could be resilient with. You know what I mean? Like
Yeah.
if someone doesn't want to go on a date with you, don't be resilient and
Oh no, no.
keep asking. But I think it applies to a lot of other areas where if you hold yourself back, yeah, you most certainly are your worst enemy, and that would ultimately not lead to the progress that I think you want or the changes in your life that most people want.
Yeah, because it's like, and then it's like if you try with more things, and then it's like then at least you have experiences you've learned from and everything. So
That's what it all comes down to, man. Wisdom is born out of experience.
yeah.
Let's talk about the deep stuff is brought to you by stamps.com. Why go to the post office? I just want to do commercials for you now.
Yeah, but now they have more of like the they have more like the because I've done like some voiceover, and now it's more like they want the conversational tone for like the
Oh,
voiceover. Yeah,
I've never done voiceover before. You know, it's funny. I started out in radio, but I've never pursued voiceover work. Maybe that's really more what I should be saying here. But yeah, they want more conversational. Let's talk about the deep stuff is brought to you by stamps.com.
yeah.
My dad loves stamps.com. He's a great guy. He watches football on Sundays. And when he's doing that, he's preparing all of his envelopes and boxes for mailing the next day. Stamps.com.
Yeah, that's what I gotta do. I gotta reach out to stamps.com to be the sponsor. That's a good idea.
Do it.
Yeah.
Do it up. What's the other one? There's a lot. There's other like. Do you know what I'm talking about? There's seemingly like 4 companies that advertise on every podcast. BetterHelp is another one.
Oh yeah, BetterHelp. Yeah, BetterHelp. I'm trying to think. I know there's other ones too. Yeah.
Yeah,
BetterHelp is like usually sponsored. Yeah.
I only really listen to like 2 or 3
And then they
podcasts,
have
so
it
I don't.
where you mention which podcast referenced you and you get a discount. That's usually like a thing
Right,
too.
right, yeah.
Yeah.
Enter deep stuff for 20%
Yeah.
off.
Yeah.
uh,
But yeah, so thank you all for listening, and thank you Ryan for coming on. It's been good catching up and talking to you again about this stuff. So
yes, sir. This was great.
yeah.
I love Sean Kneese. I'm president of your fan club.
Hell yeah. Yeah. And thank you to ChatGPT for helping me do like an outline for this episode too, which I didn't totally follow, but at least it was something to fall back
Shout
on.
out to AI
Yep,
doing all the thinking for us.
exactly.
Scary
Yeah,
shit.
maybe there'll even be an AI Sean Kneese posting this one day.
Yeah, let's talk about the AI.
Exactly. Well, if you want to keep updated with future episodes, go to Let's Talk About the Deep Stuff on social media or wherever you get your podcast, Spotify or anything else. And I don't know if you have anything you want to plug or.
Follow me on Instagram at Ryan Gurian. That is where you will get all of your Ryan Gurian news and info.
All right. Well, that about does it for this episode. We'll catch you on the next one.
Boom.
Yeah.